Imagine you're launching a new global movement.
Right.
Like it could be a massive tech startup or a political campaign or even some kind of philosophical revolution.
Oh, wow. Okay. High stake.
Very high stakes.
Yeah.
And you are standing in front of your very first board of directors. These are the people who are going to carry your entire vision to the ends of the earth.
Right. Your core team.
Exactly. But when you look at them, you realize your founding team consists of, well, a guy who chronically lies under pressure, two brothers who constantly bicker over who gets the best title, and a handful of wildly impulsive laborers who tend to fall asleep when you need them the most.
Yeah, that sounds like an absolutely terrible management strategy.
It sounds like a recipe for historical disaster.
It really does. But I mean, that is the exact historical reality behind one of the most famous declarations in human history. We love to strip away the messy context of ancient texts, you know?
Oh, for sure. We just want the highlight reel.
Right, the polished legacy, the famous quotes we can just stitch onto a throw pillow. But when we actually chip away at the marble and look at the raw, unpolished reality of who the original audience was, the picture completely shatters.
It totally does. And that tension between a messy reality and a polished legacy is exactly what we're focusing on today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled you're joining us.
We really are.
Today we're looking at a sermon titled The Salt and the Light. It was delivered by Nick Williams on May 28, 2026. And our mission today is to examine how this text unpacks one of the most famous passages in history.
That would be Matthew 5.1314 from the Sermon on the Mount.
Exactly. And just to be incredibly clear with you up front, the source material we're looking at today is deeply religious and theological. But our goal in this deep dive is not to endorse a religious viewpoint.
Right, we aren't pushing any particular theology here.
Not at all. We are simply here to explore the fascinating ideas, the rich historical context, and those really powerful literary metaphors contained within the speaker's text. We are analyzing the concepts, plain and simple. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, the speaker actually opens by addressing that exact danger of cherry-picking quotes. Like, taking a famous sentence out of an ancient text basically allows you to twist it to mean almost anything.
Oh, absolutely. You lose the grounding.
Exactly. So the sermon insists that to understand the actual weight of the words, you are the salt of the earth and you are the light of the world, we have to ask a very grounded historical question. Who was Jesus actually looking at when he said this?
Let's set that scene. We are on a hillside in Galilee, and there's this massive crowd of people who have followed Jesus, because of his healing in the area.
Or a huge crowd, yeah.
But within that huge crowd, the text points out he is speaking very specifically to some of his newly called disciples.
Right. And based on the timeline and the historical accounts, we know at least 4 specific men were sitting front and center. That's Simon Peter, his brother Andrew, and another set of brothers, James and John.
And historically, we know these guys eventually become absolute giants, right? I mean, Andrew becomes this quiet but unshakable force. Peter preaches the Pentecost sermon, which is essentially this sociological earthquake that alters global history.
Yeah, totally changes the trajectory of everything.
And then James becomes the first recorded apostolic martyr. John lives to be an old man, survives a penal colony on the Isle of Patmos, and authors all this highly complex apocalyptic literature.
They definitely leave a massive legacy, but the sermon forces us to look at their present reality on that hillside. Because on the day they hear this famous declaration, they are none of those things.
Right.
They are just ordinary, highly imperfect, very impulsive fishermen. Like Peter is notoriously reckless. He's the guy who will, in a matter of months, swear he doesn't even know who Jesus is just to save his own skin.
Yeah, under pressure, he completely folds.
And James and John, they are literally nicknamed the Sons of Thunder because they are so aggressively ambitious. They spend an embarrassing amount of time arguing over who gets the highest status in the group. They just repeatedly misunderstand the core mission.
See, I really struggle with the logic here. Why in the world would you assign these deeply flawed guys such massive world-changing titles?
It's a great question.
I mean, Jesus looks at them and says, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." He gives them these titles before they've actually done anything noteworthy, and presumably knowing they're going to fail spectacularly in the near future.
Yeah.
It just feels like terrible leadership to put that kind of pressure on a team that hasn't proven itself.
What's fascinating here is how the sermon frames this. It's not a leadership misstep. It's an exercise in divine foresight and declarative identity.
Declarative identity.
Yeah. Jesus isn't evaluating their current resume of good deeds. He is using declarative language to speak their future reality into existence. He calls them what they will become through the power of the Holy Spirit, looking completely past the immediate impulsiveness and the coming denials.
It's a fascinating psychological mechanism, honestly. The leader refuses to be limited by the followers' present failure and instead just anchors them to their future potential.
Exactly. The speaker emphasizes that God calls people based on his own will and providence. He knew the crowd would eventually abandon him, and he knew these specific 4 men would fracture under pressure. But he establishes their immense value up front anyway.
And then the sermon takes that historical reality that the original Salt and Light guys were an absolute mess, and it pivots. It uses that to challenge the listener today.
It really goes after the modern myth of the perfect religious person.
Yeah, what we might call the born believer. And Williams actually shares a really vulnerable personal anecdote to illustrate this. He confesses that for years he would casually lie to people.
Oh, about his background.
Right. When asked about his faith, he would just smile and claim he had, quote, been a Christian his whole life.
Because he was doing all the right things on paper, right? He was going to church every Sunday, attending the youth rallies, going to summer camp.
Exactly. He was executing all the external behaviors flawlessly.
But he admits in the text that it is fundamentally impossible to be a Christian your whole life.
It's like thinking you're a licensed pilot just because you spent your entire life sleeping in the first-class cabin.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. You can be surrounded by the environment of aviation. You can know what the cockpit looks like, but that doesn't mean you actually know how to fly the plane. He was entirely confusing physical location with internal transformation.
He thought proximity to the thing was the thing itself.
Exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting,
Yeah.
because proximity is merely geographical, but transformation is structural.
And to back up this assertion that innate human perfection is a complete myth, the sermon brings in some heavy textual evidence. He references King David in Psalm 51, where David flatly states he was sinful at birth.
Which is a pretty stark admission.
Very stark. And he brings in the Apostle Paul from Ephesians 2, who argues that people are by nature children of wrath, totally driven by their own fleshly passions.
It is a radical level-setting exercise.
Yeah.
The text is demanding that we acknowledge nobody starts at the finish line.
Right. The core takeaway from the source is that no one is born with this identity. It requires an active intervention of grace. It requires being drawn and responding.
Which connects seamlessly back to Peter, James, and John.
Exactly. They were flawed. Humanity is flawed, meaning any transformation has to come from outside of their innate abilities.
So, if humans start at a deficit, naturally flawed and weak, how do they actually become the salt of the earth? Let's get into the mechanics of this first metaphor, because the first century history of salt is completely different from how we view it today.
Oh, totally. Today, salt is an afterthought. It's just a cheap condiment on your table.
Right, you get it for free at drive-thrus.
Yeah. But in the first century Mediterranean world, salt was literally the difference between life and death. Without refrigeration, salt was the primary technology for preserving meat. It arrested the decay of dead flesh.
And it was used medically too, wasn't it?
It was. It was used in medicine to cleanse and cauterize wounds. It was so highly valued that Roman soldiers were frequently paid their wages in salt. In fact, the speaker points out that the Latin word salarium is the etymological root of the modern English word salary.
Wow. So when Jesus tells a crowd of working-class people, you are the salt, they are not picturing a shaker on a dining table.
No, not at all.
They're picturing currency. They're picturing the very thing that keeps their winter food supply from rotting.
And it also carried immense biblical weight for a Jewish audience. The sermon notes that the prophet Elijah used salt to miraculously purify a contaminated spring.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, and in the book of Leviticus, God commanded that every single grain offering had to include salt. It functioned as a symbol of an unbreakable covenant and of something set apart for a sacred purpose.
So calling these struggling fishermen salt is a staggering declaration of their intended influence on a world that is naturally prone to decay.
It's a huge calling. But the text also includes a severe warning. It says, if the salt loses its saltiness, it's useless.
And Williams brings in an analogy here to explain the mechanics of losing that saltiness.
Mm.
He asks us to imagine taking a tiny pinch of salt in your hand and throwing it into a massive Olympic-sized swimming pool.
Right, and obviously the physical properties of the pool do not change.
Right, the water doesn't suddenly become ocean water.
No, the salt just gets completely diluted until it is functionally non-existent. It loses its entire crystalline structure.
I love the sociological implication here. The speaker is arguing that it takes an immense amount of energy to maintain your distinct identity when you are surrounded by an environment that is chemically designed to dissolve you.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sermon uses this exact dilution concept to explain the absolute necessity of collective community.
Community is the defense against dilution.
Exactly. A single believer acting as one tiny grain of salt, trying to survive and influence the culture entirely alone, will be diluted by the sheer volume of the world. The hardships, the cultural currents, the daily friction it operates, just like that Olympic-sized pool overwhelming a single grain.
This directly challenges the modern mindset of isolated individualism. We love to say, I have my own personal beliefs, but I don't need a community. I don't want to deal with the friction of other people.
Yeah, we want the faith without the people. But to illustrate the danger of that isolation, the source pulls a really vivid example from the Old Testament. It's the story of Moses in Exodus chapter 17.
Oh, the battle scene.
Right. Israel is fighting a brutal battle against the Amalekites, and the mechanism of victory here is strange. As long as Moses stands on the hill with his hands raised up to God, Israel wins. But when he drops them, Israel starts losing.
Right. And Moses, despite being the great leader, gets physically exhausted. The weight of keeping his arms up is just too much.
Yeah, his body literally starts giving out.
I have to be honest, I have always found this story a bit suspicious. I mean, Moses is the legendary figure who parted the Red Sea and faced down the Pharaoh of Egypt. Are we really supposed to believe he couldn't just power through, keeping his arms in the air for a few hours? It almost feels intentionally helpless.
Well, according to the source, it is intentionally helpless. The sermon argues that Moses' weakness is a theological necessity.
Oh, really? How so?
Think about it. If Moses could win the battle through his own sheer stamina, he wouldn't need anyone else. He would be the solitary hero. But because his body fails him, Aaron and Hur have to come stand beside him. They physically hold his arms up until the sun goes down and the battle is won.
Wow.
The point the speaker is driving home is that you are not stronger than Moses. You are not more spiritually resilient than Moses.
That is a harsh reality check. If the guy who parted the Red Sea needed a faithful community to sustain him in his physical weakness, the average person certainly does.
Absolutely. The text moves faith completely away from being a solitary, internal feeling and frames it as a required team survival strategy. Solo survival against cultural dilution is impossible.
That sets up the second half of the passage beautifully. The "you are the light of the world" part. Because if salt is about internal preservation and communal strength, the light metaphor shifts to active, external opposition to darkness.
Right. Light has one physical job to push back the dark.
And the speaker uses a very modern analogy here that I thought was great. Imagine walking into a massively lit professional baseball stadium at night. The field is just bathed in the glow of these 30-story floodlights.
Okay, picturing it.
If you walk down onto the field holding a tiny battery-powered flashlight and turn it on, it accomplishes absolutely nothing.
Right, it's completely swallowed up.
Exactly. Shining light into a space that is already flooded with light is redundant. Light is engineers for the dark corners, which, based on the source, raises a really important question. So, is the speaker arguing against people just isolating themselves in a safe, comfortable bubble of like-minded people?
He is arguing exactly that. And to demonstrate what active engagement in dark places actually looks like, the sermon dives into the book of Daniel. And the historical setting here is vital.
Right, the Babylonian captivity.
Yes. Daniel and his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were teenagers. They were taken captive when the pagan empire of Babylon conquered Judah. They were ripped from their homes, marched across the desert, and forced into the service of a hostile foreign king.
They are essentially tiny, vulnerable lights in a terrifyingly dark room.
Exactly. And the Babylonian strategy was not merely to enslave them for physical labor. They wanted to completely assimilate them. The empire wanted to strip them of their core identity.
And the text highlights two specific tactics they use, right?
Yeah. First, they attempted to force them to eat the royal food and wine, which directly violated Jewish dietary laws. And second, they subjected them to a profound form of psychological warfare. They stripped them of their names.
They changed their names to Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Most people probably only know them by those Babylonian names.
Which proves how effective the tactic was. The sermon focuses on the hidden brilliance of their original Hebrew names. Hananiah means Yahweh has been gracious. Mishael means who is like God. Azariah means Yahweh has helped.
Wait, so every time they were addressed by their true names?
They were reminded of their relationship to their god. It was built-in neurological reinforcement.
Oh, wow. That is incredible.
Right, and the Babylonians replaced those names with titles honoring pagan deities. Belteshazzar honors the god Bel. Shadrach honors the god Aku. The empire wasn't just changing what they were called, it was attempting to sever the neural pathways to their faith. They were trying to rewrite their internal monologue.
That is so insidious, because the natural human instinct when you are a captive in an overwhelming empire is pretty binary. You either completely assimilate to survive the pressure, or you run away and hide in a cave to protect your purity.
But they reject both of those options, and this is the crux of the light metaphor. They don't hide, but they absolutely refuse to compromise their core convictions.
Right. Daniel refuses the royal food.
And later on, his three friends famously refuse to bow down to King Nebuchadnezzar's golden idol, which results in them being thrown into a literal fiery furnace. Daniel continues to pray to his god despite an imperial decree, and that lands him in the lion's den.
The narrative heavily emphasizes the friction there. But the most fascinating part is their vocational trajectory, because despite refusing to assimilate, they didn't withdraw from Babylonian society at all.
Not at all. They leaned in. Daniel engaged the empire so faithfully and with such a spirit of excellence that he rose to become one of the highest-ranking officials in the entire pagan government. I mean, he advised multiple hostile kings over decades.
So the takeaway from the source isn't to build a bunker and wait out the storm. Believers are called to serve faithfully right in the middle of a corrupt system. You were supposed to honor your responsibilities and work blamelessly without ever allowing that environment to alter who you fundamentally are.
Which brings us to the closing story of the sermon. Williams uses a narrative to synthesize these two ideas, the necessity of holding your ground and the necessity of shining in the dark.
The lighthouse story.
Yeah. He describes an old lighthouse keeper who lives entirely alone on a rocky, treacherous coastline. And every single night, regardless of the weather, he climbs the steps and lights the massive beacon.
And a visitor comes to the lighthouse and questions the utility of his work. The visitor argues that modern ships have highly skilled captains, they have advanced navigation instruments, detailed maps. He essentially asks, why does your one little light matter against the vastness of the ocean?
And the keeper's response is just profound. He acknowledges the skill of the captains and the strength of the ships. But he points out that in the middle of a severe storm, when the rain is blinding and the waves are crashing over the deck, all those advanced instruments can fail.
Visibility drops to zero.
Exactly. In that moment of absolute darkness, his light might be the only fixed point keeping a ship from smashing into the hidden rocks.
The keeper notes that if his light goes out, people he will never even meet will die in the dark. A lighthouse doesn't have the power to start the storm. It doesn't magically remove the jagged rocks from the water.
Right.
Its only job is to stand firm in the exact place it was built and shine so others can find safety.
As the sermon puts it, light is most visible when the night is darkest.
So what does this all mean? If we synthesize all the threads from this source, we are left with a pretty demanding framework. First, it destroys the myth of the perfectly polished marble statue. You don't have to be perfect to be useful, you just have to be willing to be transformed. Second, it highlights the non-negotiable necessity of community. If you attempt to maintain your distinct values in isolation, the sociological pressure of the world will dilute you into nothingness. And third, it calls for active, excellent engagement in difficult, hostile environments rather than retreating into a safe, well-lit bubble.
And building on that segment about the Babylonian captivity, I want to leave you with a final thought to really mull over. The source explored how Babylon utilized psychological warfare, subtly trying to assimilate Daniel and his friends by changing their diet and overwriting their names.
Yeah, rewriting that internal monologue.
Right. So if you examine your own life today, what are the subtle name changes happening to you? What are the slow cultural assimilation tactics currently operating in your professional circles, your social spheres, or even your digital life?
That's a great question.
Consider what you might be passively accepting without realizing it is slowly altering your core identity.
Are you retaining your real, messy, impactful identity? Or are you allowing the culture to quietly rewrite your internal monologue? Keep questioning, keep exploring, and never let anyone just hand you the highlight reel without looking at the whole story. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.